churches who all worship and have connection to the Church of the Nativity, which is the medieval or the ancient church built on the traditional site of Jesus' birth. They decided that with that part of the world, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, in a state of turmoil, there was no way that they could, with good conscience, put on their traditional Christmas displays. They could find no way, no justification for hanging up lights, bringing in bands and musicians to play in the square around the church. They could find no place for the joy, typical of those celebrations that bring thousands and thousands from all over the world to pass through that church over the days surrounding Christmas. There would be no Christmas in Bethlehem this year. We're experiencing a time in which the land of Jesus' birth, that birth that we celebrate this evening, the whole reason we are gathered here in this church some 2,000 years later in Durham, New Hampshire, on a Sunday night. We remember that birth, but we see the place where it happened once again launched into turmoil, wrecked by violence, experiencing the loss of innocent life. Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, Christians. And it's hard to celebrate Christmas in light of all of that. And yet, turmoil is nothing new to that part of the world. Our gospel story tonight, the Christmas story, is a story about a land in turmoil, a people whose fate is in flux. Joseph and Mary, who's expecting her first child, are traveling to Joseph's homeland of Bethlehem from Nazareth to be registered in a Roman census. It's a reminder that at that time, Israel was not able to determine its own fate. It had been passed from the hand of one empire to another, and now is under Roman control and rule and all the capriciousness associated with it. It was a time of turmoil. And Mary and Joseph themselves were no strangers to it. That night, they could find no place in the inn, no one who would take them in, nowhere to call home, nowhere to find comfort, nowhere for her to safely deliver the child. And yet they found a place. They made their way to that manger. Mary gave birth to Jesus in a stable. She brought life into the world, even in the midst of turmoil, even in the midst of great conflict, even in the midst of uncertainty, even in the midst of the darkness that surrounded them that night. And by bringing that child, Jesus Christ, who is both her human son, but also God made flesh, Mary brought light into that darkness. Bringing that child into the world was an act of hope. It was an act of believing that the world wouldn't always be as it was. The Roman occupation wouldn't define the future of Israel. That something else could happen. That God's promise for the world, that God's promise for the nation of Israel, for God's promise to God's people wasn't done. That there was still more to come. That God's vision of a world that was remade in the image of God's love had yet to be realized. And Jesus' birth there in the stable was the next step in that journey, the next step in that process, the next revealing of God's intention, not only for Mary and Joseph and for the people of Israel, but for all the world. Jesus' birth was a promise of hope. And that is why we celebrate Christmas this night. Not because everything is okay, not because the world is just as we want it, not because we rejoice in things just as they are and are fine with the status quo. We gather here on Christmas to remember Jesus' birth in an uncertain time, in the midst of social, cultural, political struggle. Because his birth signaled hope, first to his parents, then to his disciples, and to all who would follow after them. We gather together to remember to have hope that the world will not always be as it is, but that God is calling us to something more, that God's love is recreating this world in its image, that God desires peace where there was conflict, light where there was darkness, love where there was hate, joy where there was despair. I saw this powerful image the other day of the Lutheran church in Bethlehem, nearby the Basilica of the Nativity. And in the entryway to this church, they set up their own nativity scene. And instead of using the traditional stable and with the rough cloth and the straw everywhere, they set the scene amidst rubble that they had gathered, placing the baby Jesus in the middle of this pile of rubble. A reminder that even out of destruction can come life. Even out of a world that seems so racked by violence and uncertainty, life can emerge. That is the message of hope of Christmas. That is what we celebrate. That is what we rejoice in. That God has promised that things will not always be as they are. But there is so much more that we have yet to realize.
Amen.
Thank you, Todd. That is the message of Christmas. That was the message that baby Jesus nestled in that rubble is trying to send. That is the message that we need to hear in Durham, New Hampshire. That is the message our country needs to hear. That is the message people in Donbass, Ukraine, and the Gaza Strip need so desperately to hear. That the world will not always be as it is now, but that through God's love and through our faithful following of God's love, of that very same love, that more is possible. And so on this Christmas, may we hold on to that hope, not only for ourselves and those gathered here, but that hold on to that hope for all those who are not in this room, for folks in our community, for folks in our country, for folks around the world who are struggling to have hope. May we hold on to the hope of Christmas for us, for them, and for everyone. Amen.